3 years ago, I stood in an operating room staring at the coronary arteries of a 69-year-old retired engineer named Gerald. I've opened a lot of chests in my career, but what I saw that morning stopped me cold. His arteries weren't just narrowed. They were calcified, rigid, pale, and stiff as concrete drainage pipe. The kind of damage that takes decades to build and minutes to kill you. Gerald was on 5 medications. 5. And his cardiologist had just added a 6th. Here's what gutted me most. Gerald wasn't a man who'd given up on himself. He walked every morning. He watched his sodium. He showed up to every appointment. He did everything right by every conventional measure. And still, there he was, on my table, at 69, with the cardiovascular system of a man 20 years older. I closed his chest that day and I kept thinking about one question. What did we miss? I'm Dr. Alex Thompson. I've spent over 28 years in cardiothoracic surgery and preventive cardiovascular medicine, and what I've come to understand, not from theory, but from standing inside the human body more times than I can count, is this. The most powerful tools available to men and women over 60 are not sitting in a pharmacy. They're sitting in the kitchen. Gerald's case changed how I practice medicine, because 6 months after his surgery, I sat with him and his wife and we had a long, honest conversation about 5 specific things. 5 dietary interventions backed by clinical research that his body had been waiting for his entire adult life. Within 4 months, his inflammatory markers dropped. His vascular function improved measurably. His physician reduced him from 6 medications to 3. 3. The same man whose arteries look like infrastructure from 1987. What I'm going to share with you today isn't a miracle. It isn't a workaround. It is the science your body already understands, delivered through food the way it was always designed to be delivered. 5 things. No new prescriptions. No injections. No side effects. Just food doing what food, in the right form and the right sequence, has always been capable of doing. Stay with me. By the time we're done, you'll know exactly where to start. Tonight, let me tell you something that rarely gets said clearly in a 15-minute doctor's appointment. After 60, rising blood pressure is not simply about stress. It is not simply about the salt shaker on your dinner table. Those things matter, yes, but they are surface-level explanations for something happening much deeper. Something structural. Something that has been quietly building inside your arterial walls for decades before your doctor ever circled a number in red. Here is how I explain it to patients who want the honest version. Your arteries are living tissue. When you are young, they behave like brand new silicone tubing, supple, responsive, capable of expanding and contracting with every heartbeat. That elasticity is not cosmetic. It is functional. It is what allows your cardiovascular system to absorb the mechanical force of 100,000 heartbeats every single day without wearing itself out. But beginning in your late 40s and accelerating significantly after 60, those vessel walls begin to change at the cellular level. The smooth muscle fibers that give arteries their flexibility start to stiffen. Collagen accumulates. Calcium deposits form. The tube that was once silicone begins behaving more like copper pipe, and copper pipe does not flex. When pressure builds inside a rigid system, that pressure has nowhere to go. It doesn't dissipate. It doesn't get absorbed. It simply builds, forcing your heart to work harder with every single beat, just to move blood to your brain, your kidneys, your extremities. In 28 years of cardiothoracic surgery, I have seen the interior of that damage more times than most physicians see in a lifetime. I have held arteries in my hands that belong to men and women in their mid-60s, arteries that had the structural integrity of something that should have been replaced a decade earlier. And the same question follows me out of every operating room. What was the engine driving this? The answer, almost without exception, is chronic vascular inflammation. Not the inflammation you feel when you twist an ankle. Not the visible, acute kind with redness and heat and swelling. This is the invisible kind, low-grade, relentless, producing no symptoms you can name quietly, degrading the inner lining of your blood vessels year after year, meal after meal, until one day the numbers on a blood pressure cuff tell the story your body never announced out loud. Here is the critical thing to understand. Inflammation is not random. It is not inevitable. It is, in very large part, dietary. What you consume 3 times a day is either actively suppressing that inflammatory process or actively accelerating it. Every meal is a biological decision. What I am going to share today is not a replacement for your prescribed medications. I want to be unambiguous about that. This is about giving your body 5 clinically grounded tools that work alongside your treatment, reinforcing what medicine is trying to accomplish at the cellular level. Starting tonight. Are you ready? Let's go. I want to ask you something simple, and I want you to answer it honestly. Tonight, when you sit down for dinner, when the plate is in front of you and everything is warm and ready, what do you reach for first? For most people over 60, the answer is automatic. The roll, the rice, the pasta, whatever is closest, whatever smells best, whatever the hand has already learned to find without thinking. It is not laziness. It is decades of habit, built so deep it operates below conscious thought. I am going to ask you to interrupt that habit with one change. A change so structurally simple that when I first explain it to patients, I can see them searching my face for the part where it gets complicated. There is no complicated part. Eat your vegetables first, before anything else on that plate. Every meal, every time. That's it. That is the entire instruction. Now let me tell you exactly what happens inside your body when you do, because the mechanism is far more powerful than the simplicity of the habit suggests. Vegetables are dense with dietary fiber. When fiber enters an empty stomach, it does something physically remarkable. It begins forming a viscous, mesh-like matrix along the stomach lining. Think of it as a slow-release barrier, a biological gate that controls how rapidly everything that follows gets absorbed into your bloodstream. When carbohydrates, bread, rice, potatoes, pasta pass through that fiber mesh, their digestion is significantly decelerated. Glucose enters your bloodstream gradually, steadily, rather than in the sharp flood that occurs when carbohydrates hit an empty stomach, unimpeded. Why does that matter for your blood pressure specifically? Because glucose spikes trigger insulin surges. And insulin in quantities your body releases in response to a sharp post-meal glucose spike is a potent vasoconstrictor. It signals the smooth muscles surrounding your blood vessels to contract, to tighten, to narrow, right there at your dinner table while you are doing nothing more than eating what you always eat. Your arterial pressure is climbing, and you feel nothing. I have had patients make this single change. Same foods, same portions, same medications, same everything, and return 2 weeks later with measurably lower post-meal blood pressure readings. Not lower by coincidence, lower by mechanism. Vegetables first, lean protein second, carbohydrates last. One of my patients, a 3-year-old, retired librarian from Connecticut, sharp as anyone I have ever met, looked at me after I explained this and said, "That's it? That's the whole thing?" I told her to try it for 2 weeks and then tell me it was nothing. She never questioned it again. Tonight, before the bread gets touched, before the rice gets lifted, finish every vegetable on that plate first. Your arteries are listening to the order of every bite. There is something I want you to look for the next time you open your kitchen cabinet. It is probably already in there, pushed to the back, behind the olive oil and the spice jars you haven't touched since last Thanksgiving. A bottle, likely half used, possibly forgotten entirely. Apple cider vinegar, 1 to 2 tablespoons, stirred into a full glass of water. With each meal, I already know what some of you are thinking, and I respect it. Skepticism is not cynicism. Skepticism is intelligence operating correctly. So let me give you the science, because this is not folk remedy territory. This is biochemistry with a published research trail behind it. The active compound in apple cider vinegar is acetic acid. And acetic acid does 2 specific, measurable things inside your cardiovascular system that matter enormously for blood pressure. The first is insulin modulation. We established earlier that post-meal glucose spikes trigger insulin surges, and that insulin surges cause your blood vessels to constrict. Acetic acid intervenes directly in that sequence. It enhances your cell's sensitivity to insulin, meaning your pancreas does not need to flood your system with it to get the job done. The spike is blunted. The constriction is reduced. The pressure response is quieter. This is not theoretical. Multiple peer-reviewed studies have documented measurable reductions in post-meal blood glucose in adults who consumed diluted acetic acid before or during meals. The second mechanism is the one that genuinely stopped me when I first encountered the data. Acetic acid stimulates endothelial cells, the cells lining the interior walls of your blood vessels, to produce nitric oxide. If you have heard that term before, here is why it matters. Nitric oxide is your body's endogenous vasodilator. It is the chemical signal that tells arterial smooth muscle to release, to open, to stop gripping. An entire class of cardiovascular pharmaceuticals exists for the sole purpose of replicating that signal. Apple cider vinegar triggers it naturally, for approximately $3 a bottle. Now, and this is non-negotiable, do not drink it undiluted. Straight acetic acid will erode your tooth enamel and inflame your esophageal lining over time. Always dilute it in a minimum of 8 ounces of water. Use a straw when possible to minimize contact with your teeth. And if you carry a history of acid reflux, gastritis, or esophageal sensitivity, have a direct conversation with your physician before incorporating this. For most people over 60 without those contraindications, this is among the lowest barrier, highest return additions available. 1 glass with breakfast, 1 with lunch, 1 with dinner. Give it 3 weeks before you judge it. Then check your numbers. I am genuinely curious. Has apple cider vinegar ever crossed your path before today? What have you heard? What have you tried? Tell me in the comments. The answers always surprise me. I want to ask you something that most physicians never think to ask their patients. You probably check your blood pressure in the morning. Maybe you have a cuff on your nightstand, or you stop at the pharmacy machine once a week. You watch that number. You report it to your doctor. You make decisions based on it. But here's the question nobody is asking you. What is your blood pressure doing while you are asleep? Because for a significant portion of people over 60, including many with acceptable daytime readings, the answer is something that should be discussed far more openly than it is. Under normal cardiovascular physiology, blood pressure follows a predictable nocturnal pattern. As you move into deeper sleep, your nervous system shifts into parasympathetic dominance. Your heart rate slows, your vessels relax, your pressure drops typically 10 to 20% below your daytime baseline. Cardiologists call this dipping. It is not optional. It is restorative. It is when your heart genuinely rests. But in a condition called nocturnal hypertension, that drop never comes. Pressure stays elevated, or in some cases actually climbs throughout the night, for 6, 7, 8 hours, while you are lying completely still and entirely unaware. Your arterial walls are under sustained mechanical stress. Your heart is laboring against resistance it was supposed to be relieved of hours ago. You wake up tired, not from poor sleep necessarily, from cardiovascular work you never knew you were doing. Nocturnal hypertension is among the most underdiagnosed patterns in cardiovascular medicine. It carries a substantially elevated risk for stroke, left ventricular enlargement, and early morning cardiac events. And your standard morning reading will not reveal it. You can walk into your doctor's office with a perfectly unremarkable number and still be experiencing dangerous pressure elevation every single night. This is where walnuts enter the conversation, and I want you to take this seriously, because the research behind it is more robust than most people expect. 30 grams of walnuts. Approximately 14 halves consumed 30 minutes before sleep has been documented in multiple clinical studies. To meaningfully support the nighttime pressure reduction your body is designed to produce. The mechanism involves 3 converging compounds: alpha-linolenic acid, a plant-derived omega-3 that reduces vascular inflammation and improves arterial compliance; L-arginine, a precursor to nitric oxide, the same endogenous vasodilator we discussed earlier; and melatonin, which supports the neurological transition into parasympathetic rest that allows your cardiovascular system to finally decompress. Together, these compounds send a coherent biochemical message to your arterial walls. The day is over. Release. 30 gram, 14 halves, 30 minutes before bed. It costs less than $1 a night. It requires no preparation. And in nearly 3 decades of practice, it remains one of the most consistently effective bedtime recommendations I have ever made. Write it down. Start tonight. I want to tell you about something that has been growing in tropical gardens for centuries, long before pharmaceutical companies existed, long before blood pressure was measured in millimeters of mercury, long before anyone had a name for the condition it was quietly treating. A flower, deep crimson, dramatically beautiful, and, as it turns out, cardiovascularly significant in ways that modern research is only now fully quantifying. Hibiscus. 3 cups a day. You may already know it by another name. In the Caribbean, it is called sorrel. Across North Africa and the Middle East, it is Carcadet. In parts of Latin America, Agua de Jamaica. The names change by geography. The flower and what it does inside your arterial walls does not. Here is the biochemistry. Hibiscus flowers are dense with anthocyanins, the same class of potent polyphenolic compounds found in blueberries and pomegranates, alongside a group of organic compounds called hibiscus acids. When these compounds enter your bloodstream, they initiate a mechanism that will sound familiar to anyone who has ever been prescribed blood pressure medication. They inhibit angiotensin-converting enzyme, ACE. ACE inhibitors are among the most widely prescribed cardiovascular drugs on the planet. Their function is precise. They block the enzymatic pathway that signals your blood vessels to constrict. When that pathway is inhibited, vessels relax. Resistance drops. Pressure follows. Hibiscus executes that same inhibition naturally, without a prescription, and without the persistent dry cough that drives so many patients to request a different medication. A study published in the Journal of Nutrition documented an average reduction of 7 points in systolic blood pressure among adults with mildly elevated readings who consumed hibiscus tea daily. 7 points. In cardiology, that is not a rounding error. That is a result that changes a clinical conversation. 3 cups daily. Hot or cold, both preparations retain the active compounds effectively. No added sugar. Because sugar generates the insulin response and vascular constriction we have spent this entire video working to prevent. A measured teaspoon of raw honey, if the tartness is too pronounced. That is a reasonable concession. One essential caution, and I want to be direct about this. If you are currently prescribed an ACE inhibitor medication, lisinopril, enalapril, ramipril, any of that class, speak with your physician before making hibiscus tea a daily habit. Layering a natural ACE inhibitor onto a pharmaceutical one can drive pressure below therapeutic range. The goal is optimization, not overcorrection. For most people over 60 without that specific contraindication, this is among the most elegant interventions I know of. A warm cup in the morning while the house is still quiet. Another in the early afternoon. A final cup in the evening as the day winds down. 3 cups. 1 flower. Centuries of use, and now the clinical data to explain exactly why it worked all along. Your arteries will register the difference before you do. What are you currently drinking in the morning? Tell me below. I am genuinely curious how many of you are already closer than you think. After this video ends, I want you to do one thing before you sit down for dinner. Walk to your kitchen, open the cabinet where you keep your cooking oils, and read the labels on every bottle in there. What I'm about to tell you is, in my clinical opinion, the single most consequential piece of nutritional information in this entire video. It is also the piece that a multi-billion-dollar processed food industry has had a profound financial interest in obscuring for the better part of 50 years. Look at what you are cooking with, because the oil in that pan, the one you have been using without question, possibly for decades, may be doing more damage to your arterial walls than almost anything else in your kitchen. Here is what most people do not know. The oils that dominate American supermarket shelves, canola oil, soybean oil, corn oil, sunflower oil, generic vegetable oil, are extraordinarily high in omega-6 fatty acids. Now, omega-6 is not inherently pathological. Your body requires it in measured amounts for normal cellular function. The problem is not the compound. The problem is the ratio, and what has happened to that ratio in the modern American diet is nothing short of a cardiovascular catastrophe. For the vast majority of human history, across virtually every culture and geography, people consumed omega-6 and omega-3 fatty acids in roughly balanced proportion, somewhere between 1:1 and 4:1. That balance is what our inflammatory biology evolved to operate within. Today, the average American consumes omega-6 and omega-3 inches, a ratio of somewhere between 15:1 and 20:1. 15 to 20 times more omega-6 than omega-3. I want to tell you about something that has been growing in tropical gardens for centuries, long before pharmaceutical companies existed. Long before blood pressure was measured in millimeters of mercury. Long before anyone had a name for the condition it was quietly treating. A flower. Deep crimson. Dramatically beautiful. And, as it turns out, cardiovascularly significant in ways that modern research is only now fully quantifying. Hibiscus. 3 cups a day. You may already know it by another name. In the Caribbean, it is called sorrel. Across North Africa and the Middle East, it is carcadet. In parts of Latin America, Agua de Jamaica. The names change by geography. The flower and what it does inside your arterial walls does not. Here's the biochemistry. Hibiscus flowers are dense with anthocyanins, the same class of potent polyphenolic compounds found in blueberries and pomegranates, alongside a group of organic compounds called hibiscus acids. When these compounds enter your bloodstream, they initiate a mechanism that will sound familiar to anyone who has ever been prescribed blood pressure medication. They inhibit angiotensin-converting enzyme, ACE. ACE inhibitors are among the most widely prescribed cardiovascular drugs on the planet. Their function is precise. They block the enzymatic pathway that signals your blood vessels to constrict. When that pathway is inhibited, vessels relax. Resistance drops. Pressure follows. Hibiscus executes that same inhibition naturally, without a prescription, and without the persistent dry cough that drives so many patients to request a different medication. A study published in the Journal of Nutrition documented an average reduction of 7 points in systolic blood pressure among adults with mildly elevated readings who consumed hibiscus tea daily. 7 points. In cardiology, that is not a rounding error. That is a result that changes a clinical conversation. 3 cups daily. Hot or cold, both preparations retain the active compounds effectively. No added sugar. Because sugar generates the insulin response and vascular constriction we have spent this entire video working to prevent. A measured teaspoon of raw honey, if the tartness is too pronounced. That is a reasonable concession. One essential caution, and I want to be direct about this. If you are currently prescribed an ACE inhibitor medication, lisinopril, enalapril, ramipril, any of that class, speak with your physician before making hibiscus tea a daily habit. Layering a natural ACE inhibitor onto a pharmaceutical one can drive pressure below therapeutic range. The goal is optimization, not overcorrection. For most people over 60 without that specific contraindication, this is among the most elegant interventions I know of. A warm cup in the morning while the house is still quiet. Another in the early afternoon. A final cup in the evening as the day winds down. 3 cups. 1 flower. Centuries of use, and now the clinical data to explain exactly why it worked all along. Your arteries will register the difference before you do. What are you currently drinking in the morning? Tell me below. I am genuinely curious how many of you are already closer than you think. After this video ends, I want you to do one thing before you sit down for dinner. Walk to your kitchen, open the cabinet where you keep your cooking oils, and read the labels on every bottle in there. What I'm about to tell you is, in my clinical opinion, the single most consequential piece of nutritional information in this entire video. It is also the piece that a multi-billion-dollar processed food industry has had a profound financial interest in obscuring for the better part of 50 years. Look at what you are cooking with, because the oil in that pan, the one you have been using without question, possibly for decades, may be doing more damage to your arterial walls than almost anything else in your kitchen. Here is what most people do not know. The oils that dominate American supermarket shelves, canola oil, soybean oil, corn oil, sunflower oil, generic vegetable oil, are extraordinarily high in omega-6 fatty acids. Now, omega-6 is not inherently pathological. Your body requires it in measured amounts for normal cellular function. The problem is not the compound. The problem is the ratio, and what has happened to that ratio in the modern American diet is nothing short of a cardiovascular catastrophe. For the vast majority of human history, across virtually every culture and geography, people consumed omega-6 and omega-3 fatty acids in roughly balanced proportion, somewhere between 1:1 and 4:1. That balance is what our inflammatory biology evolved to operate within. Today, the average American consumes omega-6 and omega-3 inches, a ratio of somewhere between 15:1 and 20:1. 15 to 20 times more omega-6 than omega-3. That is not a dietary preference. That is a systemic inflammatory accelerant, and it is being delivered into your body 3 times a day, invisibly, through oils you were told were the healthy choice. Remember, the chronic vascular inflammation we discussed, the slow, silent process that stiffens arterial walls year after year, forcing your heart to work against progressively increasing resistance. Excess omega-6 from refined seed oils is one of its primary biochemical fuels. Every meal cooked in canola or soybean oil is, at the molecular level, adding timber to that fire. But there is a second problem with these oils that is less discussed and arguably more immediately damaging. They are thermally unstable. When polyunsaturated seed oils are exposed to cooking heat, the ordinary, everyday heat of a stovetop or oven, they oxidize. Their molecular structure degrades, and the byproducts of that oxidation include a class of compounds called aldehydes. Aldehydes are directly cytotoxic to vascular endothelium, the delicate cellular lining of your blood vessel walls, the same lining that, when chronically inflamed and damaged, becomes the substrate for arterial stiffening and plaque formation. Your food looks the same. It smells the same. It tastes the same. The damage is invisible, and it accumulates with every single meal. So what belongs in that cabinet instead? Two things. And I want to be specific. Extra virgin olive oil for anything that does not require intense, sustained heat. Salad dressings, gentle sautéing, finishing vegetables, drizzling over grains or legumes. Extra virgin olive oil contains oleocanthal, a naturally occurring anti-inflammatory compound that operates through a mechanism remarkably similar to ibuprofen without the gastrointestinal consequences. It is rich in monounsaturated fats that demonstrably support endothelial health and arterial flexibility. Decades of rigorous research support this without meaningful scientific controversy. Real butter for higher heat cooking. And I want to address the reaction some of you are having right now, because I understand it completely. For 30 years, you were told that butter was the enemy, that saturated fat was the arterial villain, that vegetable oils were the enlightened, heart-healthy alternative. I was told the same thing in medical school. The science has moved substantially. And as someone who has examined the interior of thousands of human cardiovascular systems, I can tell you that the evidence no longer supports that conclusion. Margarine, which many people substituted for butter in good faith, is manufactured from the same refined seed oils we are trying to eliminate. It is not a safer alternative. It is the same problem in a more solid form. Grass-fed butter, used in reasonable amounts, is a significantly more cardiovascularly appropriate choice for high-heat cooking than any refined seed oil currently on the market. You do not need to throw away what is already open. I am not asking for a dramatic gesture. When the canola oil runs out, do not replace it. Bring home extra virgin olive oil instead. Make that the last bottle of refined seed oil that enters your kitchen. That single substitution, maintained consistently over 3 to 6 months, has the potential to produce measurable reductions in your systemic inflammatory markers and corresponding improvements in your blood pressure, without changing a single other thing about how you eat. The bottle in your cabinet is either working for your arteries or against them. Now you know which is which. I need to pause here for a moment, because I have been doing this long enough to know exactly what a portion of you are thinking right now, and I want to address it directly, without deflection. You have just heard 5 things. Sequence your meals differently. Add diluted apple cider vinegar. Eat a small handful of walnuts before sleep. Drink hibiscus tea 3 times a day. Change the oil in your cabinet. And somewhere in the back of your mind, a very reasonable voice is saying, that cannot possibly be enough. If it were this straightforward, my doctor would have mentioned it years ago. I understand that response. I held that same skepticism myself, early in my training. The instinct makes sense. We have been conditioned to believe that meaningful medical intervention requires proportional complexity, that if something is genuinely powerful, it must also be difficult, expensive, or exclusive. 28 years of cardiovascular surgery have taught me otherwise. The human body is not searching for complexity. It is searching for conditions. Specifically, the biochemical conditions that allow its own repair mechanisms to operate the way they were designed to operate. What these 5 strategies share, and what I find remarkable every time I consider it, is that they all arrive at the same destination through different roads. Every single one of them reduces vascular inflammation and restores arterial compliance. That is the complete mechanism. 5 interventions, 1 underlying target, different pathways converging on the same biological outcome. Quieter, more flexible, less pressurized blood vessels. 5 doors, 1 room. Now, I want to tell you what happened to Gerald, the 69-year-old retired engineer I told you about at the beginning of this video. The man whose arteries I repaired 3 years ago. After his surgery, I sat with him and his wife for a long time, not as his surgeon, but as someone who wanted him to understand what had brought him to that operating table and what he could do to ensure he never returned. We went through all 5 of these strategies together. He implemented each one gradually, deliberately, in close communication with his cardiologist. 8 months later, he came back for his follow-up appointment. His physician had reduced him from 6 medications to 3. His C-reactive protein, a primary marker of systemic inflammation, had fallen to within normal range for the first time in over a decade. His blood pressure was stable, consistently, genuinely stable. Not controlled by medication, stable. Biologically stable. He looked, without exaggeration, like a different man. He sat down across from me, and the first thing he said was not about the surgery. He said, "Why did it take until my chest was open for someone to tell me this?" That question has not left me. The research behind everything I shared today exists. It has existed, in peer-reviewed journals, for years. But somewhere in the distance between the laboratory and the 15-minute appointment and the patient sitting alone at their kitchen table, it disappears. You are sitting at that table right now. And tonight, not next week. Not after your next appointment. Not when the timing feels more convenient tonight. You have everything you need to begin. That is not a small thing. For many people, that is everything. Before you close this video, I want to make sure you leave with something concrete. Not a feeling. Not vague inspiration. A protocol clear, specific, and actionable before your next meal. Let me say all 5 one final time. 1. Eat your vegetables before anything else on the plate. Every meal. Before the bread, before the rice, before whatever else is waiting. The sequence is the intervention. 2. 1 to 2 tablespoons of apple cider vinegar, diluted in a full glass of water, with each meal. Use a straw. Be consistent. 3. 30 grams of walnuts, 14 halves 30 minutes before sleep. Every night. Not occasionally. Every night. 4. 3 cups of hibiscus tea daily. Hot or cold. No added sugar. A small measure of raw honey, if absolutely necessary. Morning. Afternoon. Evening. 5. Remove the refined seed oils from your kitchen. Replace them with extra virgin olive oil for everyday cooking and genuine grass-fed butter for high heat. When the canola runs out, do not replace it. No prescriptions. No supplements manufactured in facilities you cannot verify. No equipment, no programs. No membership required. 5 decisions, made consistently, compounding quietly over time. Now, and this is the most important instruction I will give you today, do not attempt all 5 tonight. I mean that. I have watched motivated, intelligent people absorb information like this. Attempt a complete overnight transformation, sustain it for 11 days, and abandon everything by the 12th. That is not failure of willpower. That is failure of sequencing. Choose one, the single item on that list that feels most immediately accessible to your life as it actually exists right now. Maybe it is the meal sequencing, no purchase required. Starts at dinner tonight. Maybe it is the walnuts 14 halves, 30 minutes before bed, beginning this evening. Maybe it is simply checking the oil cabinet. One decision. Repeated with enough consistency that it eventually stops feeling like a decision at all. That is the architecture of lasting change. I have watched this work not in research abstracts, but in actual men and women in their 60s, 70s, and 80s, who looked at where they were and decided the remaining decades deserved better tools. Their blood vessels responded, because blood vessels, even after years of cumulative damage, are more biologically responsive than most people are ever told. It is not too late. For almost anyone watching this, it is genuinely not too late. Tell me in the comments which of the 5 you are starting with tonight. I read every one, and if someone in your life is managing blood pressure, is tired of medications, is looking for something grounded and honest, share this with them. This information belongs to more people than currently have access to it. One final note, and I want to be unambiguous. Everything shared in this video by me, Dr. Alex Thompson, reflects current research and nearly 3 decades of clinical experience. It is not a substitute for your personal medical care. Do not adjust or discontinue any prescribed medication without direct consultation with your physician. Bring these strategies to your next appointment. Show them this. Have the conversation. Your doctor is your partner in this. These 5 strategies are most powerful when they operate alongside proper medical supervision, not instead of it. Your heart has been working without pause, without complaint, without a single request for recognition, since before you took your first breath. It has earned whatever you are willing to give it starting tonight.